Recently, we headed down to the Ouachita Mountains in southeastern Oklahoma for our first backpacking trip. And with us, we brought our dog. This trip lasted us 3 days, 2 nights, and over 22 miles of hiking. So come along with us as we take our dog Brady to explore the Ouachita Mountains. Day 1 started off with a 7 a.m. wake up before a 3.5-hour drive from Oklahoma City. Now, Brady is usually a bit nervous about getting in the car anyway, but today was his first time sitting in his new dog car seat. To help him out, we put on the Travel Time channel from Zounds. Zounds Sound Therapy plays calming music specifically designed to calm his mind. And that is exactly what it did, so this turned out to be one of the easiest drives we've ever had with Brady, even though it was also one of the longest. So of course, we needed to stop and get him a snack from a gas station on the way. Eventually, we saw the Ouachita National Forest sign and knew we were getting close to our destination. This weekend's trip starts at Cedar Lake, one part of the Winding Stair National Recreation Area in the Ouachita National Forest. We took Brady out of the car, put on his dog booties and dog backpack that he had been training for months to use, and finally took him to see Cedar Lake before we headed off on the trail.
We're about to start our hike up to Snake Mountain. Today is day 1. And this is my first time backpacking and Brady's first time backpacking. He's not too sure about what's happening right now. He is a little bit nervous and he does not love his booties, but he's wearing them and he's coming along like a champ.
So off onto the trail we went, with our final destination for today being Horsethief Springs. Our hike today would be 7 miles, following the white blazes on the Horsethief Springs trail. Today's hike included a good mix of terrain, including creek crossings, road walks, and a lot of uphill. Once we saw the sign, we opted to take the scenic route, which would add about a mile, include some tight bushwhacking, and eventually lead us to an equestrian trail before providing a view that was worth all of it. This is quite possibly the most scenic location we've ever eaten lunch on this trail.
Wow, gorgeous.
And the view gave us a preview of our final destination, Winding Stair Mountain, which we would reach the peak of the next day. But for now, we'll continue on the equestrian trail until we see the white blazes that lead us to an offshoot of the trail, connecting us back to the regular Horsethief Springs trail. Eventually, we'll reach Goldville Divide, giving us a nice, easy road walk before we hit the switchbacks going up the ridge leading to Winding Stair Mountain and Horsethief Springs. And it was that rocky set of switchbacks that would use up most of our remaining energy for the day. For a good mile, it felt like it was nothing but endless uphill. And as we looked into the distance, we began to see the tops of some of the smaller hills in the valley below, a promising and reassuring sign of how far we've made it. Alright, so we just came up the hardest part of the trail. We're 1.2 miles away from our campsite for the night.
Feel sore and tired, but excited for the rest of the trip and really excited to get to camp.
And tomorrow we're headed up Winding Stair Mountain, which we looked at earlier. And for the next 1.2 miles, we would follow the rocky Ouachita Trail with the blue blazes on the trees as the sun started to set. We were obviously very tired, but we knew this was our last push before we would finally arrive at Horsethief Springs.
This is so narrow, you guys.
And as we started to see the signs in the distance, we knew we were coming to the end of the trail. We finally made it to Horsethief Springs. We decided to wait until the next morning to really explore that area, so we just set up our tent, got out the cooking stove, and cooked ourselves some dinner before we could finally go to sleep. After a very rough night of sleep, we finally woke up on day 2. I headed down the trail to where I had stashed the food to keep us safe from the bears, grabbed it out of the tree, and set up the stove once again to boil some water to cook delicious oatmeal for breakfast. We then took down our tent and packed our bags for the day before we would go hike about 10 miles. Before we left, we decided to take one last look at Horsethief Spring before heading over to the Horsethief Spring trailhead and then walking down the Ouachita Trail. The first portion of today's hike would be 4.6 miles on the Ouachita Trail, mostly uphill, mostly rocky terrain, to the summit of Winding Stair Mountain. Today was a nice fall day with near perfect weather, with a high around 66 degrees Fahrenheit. While we still did get extremely tired, it was a nice break from the summer hiking that we've been doing on this channel where it was extremely hot and it would take all your energy just from the heat. We were a little confused for a second about the double blazes, but if you read the sign at the trailhead, they'll explain it to you. Basically, whichever side is higher is the direction that you're supposed to go. Eventually, we get over towards the Winding Stair campground where we cross the road one more time before heading into the most exhausting part of today. Typically, when you go up a mountain on a trail in this area, you'll encounter switchbacks, which are basically designed to preserve your energy by zigzagging you up the mountain. But after you cross the road to attempt to get to the summit of Winding Stair Mountain, there's an exception. For the next mile, you walk up a basically straight inclined hill, so instead of facing switchbacks, all the elevation gain hits you right at once. After roughly 2.5 hours of hiking, we finally made it to the summit.
We made it. Yeah.
After stopping to eat some of Lenny and Larry's protein cookies, we decided to explore the top of the mountain a little more, and even Brady walked over to the Winding Stair shelter, typically used for Ouachita Trail thru hikers, to check it out. After taking a nice, long lunch break on top of Winding Stair Mountain, it was time to head back down and back to Horsethief Springs where we would camp out for a second night. The hike back was somehow even more exhausting than the hike up, but at least we got to hop around on the rocks a little bit and check out another overlook that we hadn't seen on the way up. Through the trees, we caught a glimpse of Cedar Lake, where this had all started the day before. We knew that all the way over there is where we had come from the day before and where we were going back to the next day. And that is exactly what was on our minds as we returned to Horsethief Spring. It was only about 3:30 in the afternoon, but we decided to set up our tent anyway. The tent was a nice place to sit in the shade and take a break from hiking, which we had been doing all day. At this point, Brady was very exhausted and happy to be able to take off his dog booties and backpack. As the sun began to set, we all ate dinner and started to mentally prepare ourselves for our final day. Day 3, we ran out of all the water that we brought, so we needed to refill at Horsethief Spring. If you ever take this trip, please do not refill at the area that is surrounded by bricks. That water is nasty and definitely not safe to drink. Instead, head a little bit down the hill, find the running water source around this pool area, and refill there. Also, make sure that you are still filtering your water because just drinking it out of here is definitely not safe. There's a sign around Horsethief Spring that says to boil the water for 10 minutes, and while you can do that, the filter is by far more effective. Today, we were starting at the same trailhead as we did the previous day, the Horsethief Spring trailhead, except instead of taking the Ouachita Trail, we were taking the Horsethief Springs East Loop back down to Cedar Lake. The first and slowest part of the trail for us was heading back down that ridge that we had come up the first day. It was relatively steep and rocky compared to what we'd been on the previous 2 days. As much as we wanted to get back to the car though, we still had to take a moment to acknowledge the trees around us. When you're coming from a city, there's just something different about spending 3 days in the woods uninterrupted. And the ability to experience that and have your dog with you is one of the best things. The last day was very overcast, extremely humid, and 74 degrees Fahrenheit, so while it was the easiest day for us hiking, it was the hardest in terms of weather. The upside of that is seeing the fog set on the hills, which is actually very cool, but the downside is we go through a lot more water than we'd expected to. So we needed to refill at this random stream that we would cross. And this stream actually happened to be Cedar Creek, which drained into Cedar Lake, which is where we were going. It was probably one of the best moments of this day because this scenery was a nice change from just the endless trees that had been around us for the previous days. And the color of the water here is just different than anything you can find anywhere else in Oklahoma. But eventually, we remembered we were still trying to get to the car, so we had to cross the stream and leave it behind. And as for the water, well, of course, it tasted good, but you still have to filter it. Again, we started to see signs labeled Cedar Lake, which informed us that we were getting close to our destination. Before we wrap up this trip, if you would like to see videos about the gear we used or how we trained Brady to hike like this, then subscribe because we'll be putting those videos out shortly. And the biggest relief of the entire trip was seeing that trailhead parking sign after those 22.5 miles of hiking. Eventually, we finally caught sight of our car, but nobody was as excited about that as Brady was. Here is his reaction as soon as he noticed we're going home. The beginning of the drive back was awesome, watching the low clouds set over the hills. But just as we did the drive in, we couldn't go a full 3.5 hours back to Oklahoma City without stopping for a snack.
Ready?
Yep.
Why did we feed them like this? Why don't we put it in the bowl?
Uh-oh. Eat the bread after, right?
Yeah. It's so good.
And finally, we were home. Here, again, is Brady's reaction. I hope all of you watching at home stick around so you can go on more adventures like this with us. Thank you.